Gavin, it's so great to be able to chat today. Several years ago, I interviewed for a postdoc position at NYU. I spent the day out at Stern with you and your colleagues, and I've always wondered what life would have been like had I been able to work at NYU, such an amazing city with amazing colleagues. Regardless, I'm happy to be able to chat with you again today. So thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, Nate, my pleasure. It's a real pleasure to reconnect, and I appreciate you having me on.
Well, as you think back on your research, Gavin, what you've done in the past, what you're currently working on, are there any simple, practical, underappreciated lessons you've learned that you'd most like to pass along to others?
Absolutely. So I've been spent the past few days thinking a little bit about this. Guess I would start with the importance of trying to get yourself into a flow state. Regardless of your line of work, we live in the most distractible time in human history. And I'm a big fan of Cal Newport's book, Deep Work, which really transformed the way I think about how to work. And the basic principles are to, if you can even just get like 2 hours of focused time in the day where you turn off all your notifications, you really focus and you get deep into whatever it is that you're doing, not only will you be more productive, but it just feels really good and rewarding. I recommend that book for more details in terms of techniques and habits and practices you can do to cultivate this focus. For me, that more recently that has actually involved like going to the library. I've got an office here, of course, I'm a professor, but sometimes if I really want to get into flow, I will just go into the library, sit down next to the students who are all focused on studying. It's quiet, everyone's in the zone, and it's that environment that really gets me there.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I went to law school before doing my PhD, and I was at Stanford. They've got this beautiful law building, tiny library that just had like such a great atmosphere. And there was that moment every day when I would get to the library with my books and I would just sit down and it was quiet and peaceful. And I knew that I was going to have, 2 hours of just like flow. And I've gotten a little bit away from that. How did you
Yeah.
come across Cal Newport's work and how long have you been trying to implement this?
It's been 3 or 4 years. A friend of mine who's a professor in a totally different area, in like climate policy and justice, recommended it to me. And it's pretty remarkable. He reviews a number of kind of the most famous thinkers throughout history, and many of them had extraordinary routines and habits to cultivate deep work. So I think one example was J.K. Rowling, like moved out of her house and got a hotel room and just stayed in there, like a total change of scenery to try to finish the last Harry Potter book, just as one example. And so one thing that I have not yet done, but has really tempted me is to book a train ride somewhere and then just like come back and work the whole way, because I work so well on the train. It's just this change of scenery. None of the normal distractions are there. And I just don't, I feel like I can keep going without every 20 or 30 minutes feeling the urge to do something else.
Yeah, really interesting, especially in the age of cell phones where, we're so distractible and we have these most amazing computers that have access to all of the world's collective knowledge since time began, at our fingertips. So we're in stiff competition to, be able to focus on the things at hand. I do love, this just makes me think a little bit of a tangent, but the one thing that gets me into flow, well, there's a couple things that get me into flow. But one of them is when I put on my headphones at my gaming PC, I'm instantly in flow. And I think part of it is because, it's the noise cancellation. And so you're just focused. But if you're working at the office or at home and there's the noise and the phone and the notifications, of course, that pulls you out of flow. Well, I really look forward to checking out Cal Newport's book. I'm going to really see if I can tap into this. Any other lessons you'd like to pass on today?
Yeah, absolutely. So number two is, I guess, somewhat connected to flow. I'm really excited because I've been starting a whole new program of research with a doctoral student here, Yejin Park, on the topic of play. And so there's obviously existing work on play between children, but we're interested in play between adults. And there's very little research on that. But what there is suggests, it really paints a picture of play as a critical part of our lives and as something that can have all kinds of benefits. And so the area in which it seems to have been most studied is for innovation and creativity. There's famous company IDEO is this design firm in Palo Alto. They created an incredibly playful culture at work to try to generate more ideas. And it seems like much of Silicon Valley and tech is there are many examples of companies who've at least taken pieces of that and tried to cultivate some play at work. But our thinking is that it goes way beyond just creativity and innovation, and that getting silly, getting playful can be an incredibly rewarding experience that can build strong bonds with other people, can be really restorative psychologically in terms of a break, a real break from your stresses and daily routines and responsibilities, and could also be something that can generate a really great dynamic in a group for productivity, even besides just creativity. So, as far as that goes in my own life, I try to do things like take an improv class or go play spike ball in the park or have a game night, just things that really almost transport you into another world where your normal roles and responsibilities are set aside and you live in a little bit of a fantasy world, and you get a complete break and you experience a new way of thinking.
Are you trying to do this like during the day, at night, weekends? Like, how do you try to fit this into your schedule?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's not all that routinized yet. It's not like my morning, at the library. It's a little bit more opportunistic,
Mm-hmm.
but on the weekends, definitely, I'll always make time for something that's playful. I've started playing basketball again recently, and that's been amazing. But also just getting together with friends and trying to embody a less serious and more silly sort of a personality and way of being.
So this reminds me of a number of things. First, I was listening to some researchers who research happiness and laughter, and one of their findings is that one of people's largest or biggest regrets as they get older is that they don't laugh like they used to, right? So just laughing is something, I've got a 3-year-old daughter, and it's just like everything makes her laugh. And we get older and we just get boring and serious. And so I guess one of the ways to not be so boring is to do cool stuff and do fun stuff. I was literally yesterday in my leadership class, we were talking about creativity and doing a little case study on IDEO and how they embraced kind of this playful culture. And it also made me think of Amos Tversky. He's got this famous line, where he says that, he would like take naps in the day, or they would just, him and Kahneman would just like wander around campus during the day. And he said, you waste years if you're not willing to waste hours. And so this idea of like taking a break to generate new ideas and be able to get new perspective, I thought it was a really powerful idea. We can be so focused on working hard that we forget to just enjoy it and then do these playful things to get new perspectives as well.
Yeah, I love that. There was an article I just came across a few days ago about Tropicana, the company of all people, initiating this huge push towards getting adults to have more fun. And the data that they cited in the article was that most people around the age of 27 report that they no longer have fun in their lives, and it's like the number one thing that they missed from their childhood. That's really sad, by 27. And then if you think about there's actually really compelling research on the health implications of this. So Ellen Langer is a really famous psychologist, and she did this study where she took these 70 to 80-year-old men out to like a retreat and said, we want you to behave as if you are 20 years younger than you actually are. And then after 5 days, they collected all kinds of biological markers, and they had improved in like flexibility and measures of like blood pressure and all kinds of other like physical health indicators. It wasn't just a psychological effect. And so I think if we act young, we will actually be younger and stave off aging more.
Well, what a great research program for you. I look forward to following this research and watching you continue to develop this and learning more from you. Before we wrap up, any final lessons you'd like to share?
Sure. I guess I'll share one more that is like a little bit more mainstream organizational, and it also comes from some research of mine. With a former doctoral student, CUU, who's now moving to Michigan Ross School of Business, we explored what you could call status intelligence, and it's the idea that being able to perceive sort of the informal status dynamics at work and in your groups and your teams can be really important to success. And so obviously we all know who the boss is if there's a formal sort of a hierarchy in an organization, but there's all kinds of status dynamics, as many other researchers have showed, that are not attached to formal labels. And so what we've explored is how accurately people can actually perceive, let's say if there's a group of people who are all equals in terms of their role and rank, how accurately can people watch that group interact or be part of that group and then see who is most respected, admired, and influential, and relatively less so within the group. And what we find is that this, you could think of this as kind of like the next phase of emotional intelligence, but it's actually not very highly correlated with our ability to just read people's emotions from their facial expressions. So it's something, it appears to be something new that's more focused on group interaction. And what we find is that having an accurate sense of these relative status differences in your groups and teams is really important to predicting your success at work, because you know who to go to for advice or choose as a mentor and things of that nature.
So this is really interesting. It reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend of mine just a couple months ago. And he was talking about one of his friends who's a business executive, owns an MBA franchise, and is just a brilliant kind of leader, manager. And one thing he said to me is this executive can walk into a room, and the words he used was, he can instantly identify the most important person in the room and just start kind of working them over, or at least connecting with them. Now that language isn't, the language maybe the psychologist would use, and in terms of like most important, I think as humans, we're all important. But if you're trying to get something done in a business meeting, understanding who holds the status and who the decision maker is this. So now I have a new term for it, the status acuity, right? Like this ability to identify who has the status. And how does it, have you got any insight in like how people do this, or what markers there are, or where is this research taking you now?
Yeah, great question. So that is to be determined, really. There is some existing work, as you know, on like indicators of status. And so it partly depends on culture, but at least in a Western culture, things like speaking time and like how loud you're speaking are examples. But we think it goes beyond that in looking at how people interact. So for example, if someone's speaking, is everyone like looking intently and paying close attention, or are they kind of distracted or doing something else? And then if you're offering a suggestion, are you looking to one person for their immediate reaction, their approval? So those are key. Those are like dyadic or group level cues as to who everyone seems to be paying attention to. And what we find is some people are really good at this and some people are not so good. And so one question is, what do you do if you're not that good at it? And by the way, we have a test that actually can assess how good you are at this.
Oh, wow.
But so, if you know from experience, or you happen to take this test and you realize that this is not one of my biggest strengths, it's not that hard to go around and ask people like, who do you really respect and admire? Who do you look up to around here? Who do you go to if you have a question on this particular topic? And so that's kind of a practical like to do in terms of mapping out the status dynamics in your team or your organization.
Yeah, really interesting point. Like if naturally you don't just like have this sixth sense for how to do this, you can always just ask for help and guidance, and then just being more conscious, more aware of like, who do people really pay attention to and who don't they?
That's right. Yeah.
Well, Gavin, this is awesome. I love these lessons. As you know, the theme for this podcast is simple, practical, underappreciated. I look forward to trying to figure out how to get into more deep work every day, trying to have fun. And then this work on status acuity is also really interesting. So just really appreciate you sharing these lessons and spending your time with me today.
That was my pleasure, Nate. Thank you so much.